It's weird. I would think I would have done a video on The Force Awakens by now, but I guess I never got around to it. Now seems like as good a time as any, considering the sequel trilogy is all wrapped up. I will definitely be talking about the rise of Skywalker now that more footage is available, as I have many thoughts. I made 2 videos about The Last Jedi already that you guys could check out if you haven't. In short, I really, really love it. With all that preamble out of the way, though, let's take a look back at Star Wars Episode VII, The Force Awakens. Also, for the sake of clarity, I want to add a little aside. I was not excited for this movie when it was first announced. I was actually actively against it, and for a long time, the only way I said I'd be okay with it was if they left Luke, Han, Leia, and co. out of it, as I felt their story had concluded perfectly in Return of the Jedi. The first teaser wasn't enough to change my opinion on this, as it was just 6 unconnected images. The Chewie we're home moment from the first full trailer softened me up a bit, but it wasn't until the final trailer and this moment
It's true. All of it.
that I was all on board the hype train. I'm not sure why it was this moment specifically, but the main point here is that I was very skeptical of a sequel trilogy and really had to be won over to the idea. I'm not the type of fan who wants more and more. I generally prefer the series I love to end on a high note and walk away. By the time I walked into the theater, though, I was ready to love this, but the movie still had a lot to prove to me. Let's see how it did. Now, I think, before talking about the details of the film itself, it behooves us to take a brief trip down memory lane and look back at what the state of the Star Wars landscape was when this movie was released. Disney had acquired Star Wars along with the rest of Lucasfilm in 2012 in a $4.1 billion deal with creator George Lucas. Now, once this acquisition was finalized, the expanded universe was wiped out of continuity by Disney to make way for the telling of new stories set 30 years after the original films. Eventually, those chosen to create the final story for Episode VII were Lawrence Kasdan, screenwriter of The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and J.J. Abrams, who had recently successfully brought Star Trek back to mainstream audiences. After the response to the prequel films, these choices made perfect sense and were a clear indicator of the direction this movie would go. The movie would be high energy, feature engaging dialogue, use practical effects, and most likely lean on nostalgia. Since it's been some time and the discourse seems to have changed, reminder that, at the time, the prequels were not thought of fondly. They were criticized heavily for boring, awkward dialogue, stilted performances, uninteresting camera work, and an over-reliance on CGI. The prequels will, at some point, get their own video series on this channel, but that is for another day. The Force Awakens was almost certainly meant to feel like coming home, hence the hiring of Abrams and Kasdan. And in many ways it was, while also accomplishing its other goal of pushing the franchise forward to new places. Now that we're all caught up, let's get into it. Now, immediately, this movie starts off on the right foot. The first words of the crawl are, "Luke Skywalker has vanished." Now, this sparks our imaginations right out of the gate. It also subverts our expectations, as I think most of us expected Luke to be a present force in this film. I want to say I predicted Luke would be more of a Yoda of this trilogy rather than an Obi-Wan, thus entering at a later point. But I don't remember and can't confirm that. Could just be thinking I was smarter than I was. This raises so many questions for us, though. Where is Luke? Why did he leave? Why wouldn't he come back? I mean, just compare this paragraph to the opening paragraph of The Phantom Menace, the last time we were starting a trilogy. Now, I understand the prequels were shooting for a different objective than the originals and sequels, but there's a call to adventure in the crawl of The Force Awakens that The Phantom Menace just lacks. Luke vanishing is a great hook. It gets us leaning forward in our seats, and on top of that, there's a clue to finding him. Fuck yeah, let's go get our boy, let's find Luke. We are seamlessly placed into the mindset of the film's main characters. Our goals are aligned. The Phantom Menace. Okay, trade routes are getting taxed. Jedi are going to settle a dispute. Why Jedi exactly? I won't be spending the whole time comparing these two movies, but I think this is an example of why The Force Awakens felt so fresh and vibrant after coming from the prequels. The Force Awakens is here to take you on an adventure, and that adventure begins before we even see the first shot of the film. So the crawl ends and we're off to the races. Leia's best pilot has a piece of a map to Luke, and the village he's in is immediately attacked by stormtroopers. It's fast-paced, exciting. Then we get this moment with Finn. It's such a rich character shift told without any dialogue. The camera work, sound, and John Boyega's body language perfectly illustrate Finn's crisis of conscience. It's great. Next, we are treated to 2 new Force abilities, one after the other as Kylo Ren freezes Poe's blaster bolt in midair, and then Poe himself. I remember the entire audience gasping in unison at this blaster bolt freezing in midair. Such a cool use of the Force that we've never seen before. I also love this freeze ability that Kylo does. The way both Oscar Isaac and later Daisy Ridley act, as well as whatever effect they may have used to make this happen, really sell the idea that Kylo is using his abilities to achieve this unnatural and violating result. It's a bit odd that he's never shown using this ability after this film, but I suppose he's never really in a situation where he would? I don't know. Kylo Ren is using the Force differently than any Jedi or Sith we've seen before, and these abilities fit in with the personality we later find he possesses as the film progresses. His whole getup is meant to elicit intimidation, as underneath he's just an insecure boy tempted to return home. Here we see him using abilities that project power and fear. They're flashy. He could have easily just force-pulled Poe's blaster out of his hands, but he's trying to show off a bit. From here, we get our introduction to Rey, and in keeping with the theme here, it's beautiful visual storytelling, accompanied by what may be John Williams' best piece from the new trilogy. We learn everything we need to know about Rey. In this 5-minute sequence with, I think, just one line of dialogue about food portions, we see Rey's day-to-day existence as a scavenger, her fear of being stuck here forever, her desire to be taken away from this place, that she's been here a long time and is counting the days since something happened, and that she dreams of being part of something more. And then she falls straight into BB-8 and the adventure. The sequence is carried almost entirely by Daisy Ridley's performance, and she does a knockout job. This is one of the best character introductions Star Wars has produced, in my opinion, and deserves to be viewed as comparable in quality to those of Luke and Han from the original film. This is the sequence that allowed me to sit back and feel the franchise was in good hands. I could relax. Now, while Rey's intro is what allowed me to relax and enjoy the ride, it was really Poe and Finn's escape from the Star Destroyer that made me realize how well this film was actually written. Their back and forth in this cockpit establishes their friendship more effectively in these brief moments than the entire prequel saga managed for Obi-Wan and Anakin over the course of 3 movies. Can you imagine the level of emotional weight Anakin's turn would have had if Obi-Wan and Anakin had had this type of dynamic from the beginning? Anyway, though, we get this great establishment of Finn and Poe's relationship and are also shown what we were previously told. Poe is a great pilot. He can fly a ship model he's never been in before remarkably well and has a strategic enough mind to navigate them out of trouble. We also get the establishment of Finn's cowardice, which is something he will have to overcome by the end of the film. The characters just feel so alive here. When Finn shoots the cannons of the destroyer and they both get just so fucking excited. The scene just radiates emotion and excitement. Immediately, it made me excited to see these two on more adventures. So, we've gotten a grasp of who our heroes are. It's time to get to know our villain, and this character reveal is a bit more of a drip feed. We know early on that he comes from a good place, and I think it was a safe assumption for most of us that he was a child of at least one of these 3. A bit later in the film, we get this fun play on our expectations from years of watching Vader receive bad news, and we learn a main character trait of Kylo from it. He's quick-tempered and destructive. Very shortly after this, we get the big reveal, that he's Han's son. I also love that this isn't treated as a massive twist. It's given enough gravitas in the way Andy Serkis delivers the line, but its placement early in the narrative I found interesting. It also allows more time for this relationship to inform Han's role in the film, as well as give us a read into Harrison Ford's performance. We'll definitely talk more about Kylo Ren later, but I want to get into some other stuff for a little bit. So we've established who will become our 4 key players for this trilogy, as well as some supporting characters like Hux, Snoke, and BB-8. In my opinion, the first half of this film does an excellent job of writing really fun and engaging characters who play well off of each other in a way we really didn't get in the last trilogy. This set the trilogy up for success as having a strong cast of characters is maybe the most essential piece to telling a satisfying story. The thing I think is most telling about the quality of these new characters is that we don't even reunite with our first legacy character until 40 minutes into the film, and it doesn't even feel like they've been missing. We've just been having fun on these new people's adventure, and then, bam, Han Solo and Chewbacca, and...
we're home.
Moving on from the characters, I want to address something that's been said against this film time and time again. It's even something agreed upon by many who enjoy the film, that this film is basically the same thing as Star Wars, or New Hope. And, I mean, yeah, they are the same. Just like David Cameron and Barack Obama are basically the same person. You know, because they have bones. What I'm getting at is that these two films do share many of the same basic structural elements, but calling The Force Awakens a remake of A New Hope is super reductive and, in my opinion, wrong. I have a couple reasons for thinking this. First being the characters we follow. The way I think is best to illustrate this is to ask yourself this question. Of our new characters, which one is this movie's Han Solo? Your first guess may be Poe, since he's the dashing pilot character. But Poe is a loyal soldier committed to the cause from the get-go, and he's really not around long enough in this movie to fill that archetype. Then let's look at Rey. Other than her being able to fly, not really much there regarding this comparison. Finn is the closest, as he's on the run and needs to find something to fight for by the end of the film, but that's really as far as that goes. Ultimately, the Han Solo of this new trilogy is Han Solo, but he's utilized quite differently in the narrative. He's both the father of the antagonist and the Obi-Wan archetype for Rey, a role which he clearly inhabits quite differently to Old Ben because, well, he's Han Solo. The next reason is that while we see similar locales and move through some comparable plot beats, they are used quite differently in the narrative here than in the original Star Wars. Let's look at the cantina scenes. In Star Wars, the cantina is the true kickoff to the adventure. It's our first steps into the larger world. We meet the final members of our primary cast. It's exciting. In The Force Awakens, the cantina, or Maz's castle, is where the party starts to fall apart. It occurs around the midpoint of the film. Finn chooses to run away instead of finishing his mission. Rey freaks out and refuses the call to adventure, briefly running away herself, and ends the sequence captured by Kylo Ren. It's the lowest point for our heroes, comparable narratively speaking to the death of Ben Kenobi from the original film. Another example of this is the trench runs. Both films have them, sure, but in the original film, the trench run and the battle leading up to it are the climax of the film. In The Force Awakens, the battle in the sky is treated as far secondary to the showdown happening on the ground between Rey, Finn, and Kylo Ren. Plus, the trench run itself is just a few seconds long and is not treated with much dramatic importance. In the original film, Luke and Vader don't really meet face-to-face. In fact, they don't meet in earnest until Bespin. To me, this is kind of a huge difference between the two. If I were to call The Force Awakens anything in relation to A New Hope, I think the best word would be remix, not remake. It takes familiar elements, but shuffles them up and uses them in distinct ways for different emotional purposes within the narrative. If that's not enough of a distinction for you, or the point I'm making doesn't resonate with you, that's totally fine. I do think, though, that this approach was the right move to make for this film. Use the familiar to bring people back in and get accustomed to the new cast of characters. Then you can go in a more new and different direction in the next chapter. Now, I'm going to jump back into praising this movie more in just a few moments. However, I don't think it's perfect, and now feels like as good a time as any to go through the gripes I have with the movie. For one, this movie needs to slow the fuck down. It does have moments where it takes its time, like Rey's introduction and Maz Kanata's castle, but they feel few and far between. The breakneck pace actually does work really well in the early parts of the film, like Poe and Finn's escape and subsequently Rey and Finn escaping from the TIE Fighters. These action scenes are also doubling as a way for us to learn about our new cast of characters, though. How a character behaves in a crisis is very revealing to the audience. However, take this Rathtar scene. This sequence is essentially filler. I don't hate it. I actually think it's kind of fun, but it's largely unneeded action, and it's interrupting the far more interesting story developments happening here and here. It really is just 6.5 minutes of filler. Here's the way I think this should have played out, and I fully admit this may not play fantastically, but I want to try it. So this first chunk happens, ending where Han says, "Yeah, I knew Luke." We fade out, and we fade back into the game room area where they're all having a discussion, and it turns to the map to Luke, and you get that half of the conversation. Then you have the Death Gangs show up for an abridged version of the Rathtar scene, which would play out mostly the same, except Han tells them to use the vents to crawl back to the Falcon while he talked his way out of it. He's kind of succeeding by blaming the other gang. Then the other gang shows up and ruins that plan. Rey releases the Rathtars. Han says he has a bad feeling about this, yada, yada, yada. Rathtars jump out and grab one of the guys. You can even have a callback to A New Hope here by Han saying, boring conversation anyway. Then he and Chewie use the distraction to get back to the ship hangar, where Chewie gets shot in the shoulder, and Han uses the bowcaster. Skip the rest. I'll do a rough edit using the footage from the movie, provided Disney doesn't block my video based on that. We'll see.
You are the Han Solo that fought with the rebellion. You knew him. Yeah, I knew him. I knew Luke.
The Jedi were real.
I used to wonder about that myself. Thought it was a bunch of mumbo-jumbo. A magical power holding together good and evil, the dark side and the light. It's true. The Force, the Jedi. All of it. It's all true. I got a bad feeling about this.
Conversation anyway.
Another issue I have with the film is the resolution of this scene here. I really like what's come to be known as Rey's force back, as well as the subsequent conversation she has with Maz Kanata. Has a really good dramatic through line here. The idea of Maz dropping the truth on Rey that there's nothing left for her on Jakku, but that she could have a part to play in bringing Luke back into the fold is really great. Quick aside, this is the scene Daisy Ridley was citing when she said that she was surprised people were curious about Rey's lineage. Here, in The Force Awakens, the movie with ideas that so many people say The Last Jedi threw away, just putting that out there. It's like 90% of the way to being a great scene, but then Rey suddenly flips out and runs away. I get that the initial refusal of the call is like a thing in the hero's journey, but this just doesn't work here in this way. It's a total handbrake turn in the trajectory of the scene. Then she just runs into the forest. Rey, where are you going? What's the deal here? I'm not opposed to her freaking out, rejecting her role, and returning Luke to the fight, or not taking the saber. It's just the nature of her refusal that is weird. I feel like it should have been more rooted in her feeling of inadequacy or abandonment issues or something like that. Something that bleeds into her character journey and arc rather than just not touching that thing again. That's about all I got on that. My next issue is that the film totally fails to explain the state of the galaxy at the start of this story. I understand that there was actually quite a long time between the Empire falling and the First Order rising, but that's only because I followed the press stuff leading up to this movie and had a passing familiarity with the new canon material outlining this. The movie itself totally neglects to inform the audience of what is going on with any of this, probably because of the backlash the political elements received in the prequels. I think that's the wrong lesson, though. The political element in the prequels wasn't disliked because politics in Star Wars is a bad idea. They were disliked because the execution of them was boring as fuck. If you went into this movie with only knowledge of the films, think about the questions this movie would raise. Wait, why is there a resistance and a republic? Why isn't the republic doing anything? Did the victory in Return of the Jedi mean nothing because the First Order just replaced the Empire? If you don't want to spend any time on this in the actual film, fine. Just make a tweak in the opening crawl. Change, Luke Skywalker has vanished. In his absence, the sinister First Order has risen from the ashes of the Empire and will not rest until Skywalker, the last Jedi, has been destroyed. 2. Luke Skywalker has vanished. After decades of peace in the New Republic, the sinister First Order has risen from the ashes of the Empire and will not rest until Skywalker, the last Jedi, has been destroyed. This is a tiny change for a super nitpicky complaint, but it did always kind of irk me just a little bit. One other thing I wasn't really a fan of was some of the comedic dialogue given to Finn, specifically these two lines.
Got a boyfriend? Cute boyfriend?
I'm in charge. I'm in charge now, Phasma. I'm in charge.
Bring it down.
This line about a cute boyfriend and his interaction with Phasma at the end. I don't know exactly why they bother me so much, but I think it's because they just sound so Earth-human-esque. The Phasma one also comes at a point in the narrative that should be comedically light. The stakes are high here, so it really isn't the best time for a joke. And with the boyfriend thing, maybe there should have been a Star Wars-y word that replaced boyfriend. I don't know. Finn also isn't especially comedic in either of the subsequent films, nor should he be, honestly. Poe becomes the more comedic character as early as the opening of The Last Jedi. Finn is a child soldier on the run from his fascist upbringing. The humor feels out of place coming from him. Maybe you could have had him lighten up over the course of the trilogy and be at this point comedically by the end, just to show how his friends have rubbed off on him. From Poe, the comedy makes a lot more sense. The last thing I really don't love, and that is, of course, Starkiller Base. I mean, why did we need this? Another spherical superweapon that blows up planets? The one positive I have regarding it is that the shots of it from space are very pretty. The Death Star but bigger and blows up more planets thing is just super boring to me, though. Plus, we don't even know these planets or anyone on them, so this isn't the emotional downbeat it's intended to be and really could have just been cut. I would have preferred it if the First Order had come up with something else a bit more unique that the heroes had to destroy at the end of the movie, or even had nothing to destroy at all. It just doesn't seem needed, and it's the third time we've seen a Death Star type thing in these movies. It's really all I have in terms of gripes against this film, though, so let's get back to the stuff I like. Yay! Let's talk about legacy characters, most notably Han. I really think the way all of them are used in this trilogy is quite effective, and this film sets the tone for that. Having the restraint to have Luke be absent from the near entirety of the runtime was a wise decision. The instinct that he would most likely overshadow the other characters was well-founded, and his absence serves as a suitable hook for the narrative. The ending scene where we finally get to see him is pretty fantastic as well. The new generation reaching out to the old guard for guidance is a great way to set up the rest of the trilogy. Mark Hamill's brief appearance is fantastic as well, as it alone ignites a mystery. We aren't quite sure what he's thinking, and that allowed future filmmakers to run in one of many different directions. It evokes apprehension, concern, confusion, whatever you read into it, really, but it excites us for the next chapter of the adventure. I mean, a massive amount of speculation regarding Episode VIII was about what his first words were going to be. That's a testament to the performance and storytelling decision to leave Luke out of the main story. Focusing in on Han, though, having him fill the Ben Kenobi role for Rey was an inspired choice. Han in this role provides a suitably different father figure for Rey than Ben was for Luke. He doesn't carry the same mystical philosophy portrayed by Alec Guinness, but he is a legend to Rey and Finn, and they share that perspective with us, the audience. The later revealed element that this trilogy's villain is his son is also a nice twist on Obi-Wan being the former mentor of the original trilogy's villain. He maintains the lovable gruffness we've grown used to, but Ford manages to balance that with an underlying sadness in his performance. While Han and Chewie's reintroduction is endearing and nostalgic for fans, it also illustrates to us immediately that all is not well for Han. It becomes readily apparent that he isn't with Leia anymore. This is why I kind of get confused at people upset about how Luke was portrayed in The Last Jedi, but enjoyed this. It's the same thing. This movie tricks us a little bit because Han like this gives us the warm fuzzies of our nostalgia blanket, but Han being like this again shows us, just after a brief examination, that time has not been kind to him. And it's not long after Han's reintroduction that we discover why that is. I've talked about this before, but the sequels really add an element of tragedy to the legacy characters, which I find to be an insightful choice and a suitable justification for their inclusion. I will again make note that this concept art look for Han would have been really fun to see. Could have even had a moment before he leaves for Starkiller where he shaves, because that's kind of a symbolic thing for male characters returning their responsibilities, but whatever. I think Han's final arc in this series is pretty perfect. Han, since we met him, has been a character learning the importance of showing up and doing the right thing. In the original, he of course comes back and saves Luke, allowing the rebellion to survive. In Empire, he sticks around to help Leia instead of taking care of himself, and is rewarded in the next film when his friends do the same for him. Force Awakens, I think, is the pinnacle of his character journey. He shows up for his son. Yeah, it ends badly for him, but I always think he knew he wasn't coming off that bridge. I mean, look at his face here. My read on this scene is that Han chooses to make the ultimate sacrifice for just the chance that it can save his son. Even after he's had the experience of being betrayed and killed by said son, his final act is brushing Ben's cheek as he falls, showing he still loves him. It's really tragic, but I think it's a beautiful cap to Han's character. He showed up when it mattered most. And while I have many issues with Rise of Skywalker, which I will eventually talk about, this moment is clearly impactful in Ben Solo's return to the light, so Han's sacrifice ultimately worked. On to Leia. I think having her be the most steadfast of the original big three was a pretty good move. Of the three of them, she has always been the most consistent. Leia's arc throughout the original trilogy was more of a flat arc, with a slight exception to be made in Empire. To be clear, this isn't a slight. A flat character arc is a thing, and it just means the character remains true to their principles throughout the story and inspires change in either the world or the characters around them. She's been a leader ever since we met her. As we know, she isn't a primary presence in this film, but the moment where she feels Han's death through the Force might be one of the most memorable moments from the new trilogy. Maybe. It's also impressive that Star Wars is so ingrained in our pop culture that everyone in the audience knows exactly what's going on here, without a single line or reaction from another character to explain it. Leia's role in this film seems to be mostly a minor presence, though, meant to complement Han's arc, and it accomplishes that in my mind. Just another tragic element of Carrie Fisher's passing is that she never really got the opportunity to have Leia's final big moments the way Harrison and Mark did with their characters. R2 and 3PO aren't really a major part of this movie, so there isn't much to discuss with them specifically, I'm being honest. Chewie is used as solid comedic relief for the most part, but does have an impactful moment towards the end. Chewie having to watch his friend die in that way makes for a great scene, plus watching him totally go off on the First Order troops in response is a great little mini catharsis for us. I also really like the theory that he isn't able to bring himself to a kill shot on Kylo Ren, and I'm gonna treat that as canon. They should have given him gray fur, though. He looks too clean in these movies, and also younger than he looks in the old ones. Very minor thing, but it is weird. Briefly want to touch on the effects in this film. The move back to more practical effects blended with CGI elements feels like a great choice. Something about the tangibility of practical sets, costumes, and props feels essential to the Star Wars aesthetic. I have nothing against CGI. It is an incredible tool that allows for some pretty spectacular stuff, but it does have its shortcomings, and I think George leaned a little bit too heavily on it in the prequels. Like much of this film, the effects were a welcome return to form. Now I want to talk about action scenes and how this movie does them well. J.J. Abrams is, in general, pretty good at action scenes as he makes slick, well-shot, and coherent sequences that move the story forward. Usually. So, what, to me, makes a good action scene? Obviously, the choreography is a big part of that, but maybe not quite in the same way most people think. I understand I may not be using this term exactly as others do, just roll with me. You see, for my taste, this is a better choreographed fight than this. That may seem absurd, and I get that. Let me explain. Obviously, the technical aspect of the choreography in the Phantom Menace duel is on a higher level than that of the Jedi duel. It's very tightly done and well executed. The reason I find the Jedi duel to be more well choreographed is that the characters' movements and actions are defined by their emotions and state of mind at any given point in the scene. The choreography tells a story in tandem with the screenplay. In the Jedi duel, when Luke is on the offensive early on, he's losing, because he's doing exactly what the Emperor wants. We don't want Luke to be attacking like this. When Luke regains control of himself, he really only blocks Vader's attacks. In fact, he spends most of the duel with his weapon off, until he snaps and reaches his lowest point, as he overpowers his opponent. Then he realizes his error. Luke's victory in the fight comes when he throws down his weapon. The fight choreography reflects the character's journeys throughout the scene here. In the Phantom Menace duel, there's really nothing going on for almost the entire fight, except that they're fighting. Until Qui-Gon dies, there's nothing character or plot related that happens in this duel, at all. There is one exception to this moment when they're stuck in this inexplicable laser wall hallway. We see Maul pacing back and forth impatiently while Qui-Gon patiently meditates. This is actually a good moment. The shortcoming here is more to do with the movie at large, not providing these characters the basis for this behavior, rather than the action itself. But aside from this, none of the characters' actions seem to correlate to their emotional state or skill in the fight. So what does this have to do with The Force Awakens specifically? Well, largely, I think this movie learned from the successes and failures of previous episodes and took them to heart. 1, the fights have real weight, and every impact can be felt. Sound design helps in this regard, too. 2, the scenes reflect characters' skills and emotional states. Let's start with Finn using the lightsaber and fighting the traitor guy. Finn is kinda bad with the lightsaber. He's able to take out some troopers, but it's really clumsy. Then he gets his ass kicked by this dude who is clearly more trained in hand-to-hand combat. When Finn picks up a blaster, though, he excels and is a crack shot. On to the primary example of solid choreography, the final lightsaber fight in the Force. So we have 3 players here, Kylo Ren, Finn, and Rey. Let's go through each of them. Kind of already touched on Finn, so I'll jump to Kylo Ren. He is severely injured and also emotionally torn by what he just did to his father, and his fighting reflects that. He's very aggressive and makes a lot of really rash, primitive sword swings for the most part. His physical and emotional injuries impede his fighting ability, and it shows. And on that note, the reason we are shown Chewie's bowcaster hitting people, not 1, not 2, but 3 times, is so we understand what happens when you get hit with that thing. You go fly. So, when Kylo Ren takes a bowcaster shot to the gut and doesn't fly away, we should be taking 2 things. 1, he's strong enough to not succumb to the wound as others did, and 2, he is severely injured from this blast. The fact that so many people have an issue with Kylo losing this duel is not so much an issue with the film as it is a lack of audience reading, or in this case viewing, comprehension. To summarize Kylo's state of mind and physicality going into this fight,
You were unbalanced, bested by a girl who had never held a lightsaber. You failed!
and thus lost to a less skilled opponent. If Kylo Ren is not injured as he is going into this duel, then Rey doesn't walk away from this fight, at least not on her own accord. This is visual storytelling, and very basic visual storytelling at that. The amount of people who still complain about this, and about Mary Sue, is quite frankly shocking and pathetic. Well, now that all those people closed the video down, let's look at Rey's fighting. Watching the duel, she's mostly just running away and blocking when she needs to, because she's outmatched, and she knows it. It's not until she reaches into her connection with the Force that she really has the strength to strike back. The fight even follows little baby 3-act structure to an extent. The inciting instant is her catching the saber, which gives her a bit of a confidence boost and knocks Kylo mentally off balance. Act 2 is her mostly running away from him, culminating in the midpoint where she's backed against the cliff, actually almost the exact middle of the fight in terms of runtime. Then the rising action is her reaching into the Force and gaining the upper hand with a climax as she slashes Kylo's face. See? Action that tells a story. On the note of story, let's start closing out with that. The focus so far has been more on the characters than the plot itself because I personally find engaging characters to be a rung or two above a strong plot in terms of importance. The plot does still matter quite a bit, though, in making a satisfying movie, and I think this movie has a pretty good one. I mentioned earlier how, if anything, The Force Awakens is more of a remix of A New Hope rather than a remake. That really only applies to the set dressing of the narrative. The core of the narrative of the original Star Wars is a young man is ushered into a larger story by a mentor figure and becomes a hero by saving the day with the help of his friends. R2 and the plans carried within him aren't the emotional core here. The plans are more or less just a thing to get the plot rolling. Not quite all the way to a MacGuffin, but close. The core of The Force Awakens is a defecting soldier and a scavenger stumbling into an adventure together, becoming friends, and becoming part of the legends they used to hear about. BB-8 and the map he carries is also far more essential to the core of this story. They, and we, want to find Luke, and there are emotional and character-based reasons everyone wants him found. This, as a driving force for a narrative, would be more comparable to a movie about Leia on a mission to bring Obi-Wan back into the fold of the rebellion, honestly. I'm not denying there are similarities between the two films, but they feel surface level to me. And the similarities I find fun as well, because we are seeing comparable events through the eyes of new characters, and they respond differently. This movie is a great example of a re-entry into a beloved franchise. It uses the familiar to start something new, and the collaboration between J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan was the perfect recipe to start a new trilogy. In closing, I find this film great. A lot of people say it doesn't hold up to multiple rewatches, but I don't know. I have a great time every time I watch it. Fun characters on an exciting adventure off to find their place in the story and bring the old guard back into the mix. It just makes me happy, and I don't find it too pandering despite the fan service it does contain. It's just a film that gives me a lot of joy each time I revisit it, and it completely wowed me the first time I saw it. I went into it pretty apprehensive, but came out completely elated and excited for the next part of the story. Force Awakens, in my mind at least, accomplished everything it set out to do spectacularly. I think that's about everything I wanted to say about The Force Awakens. If I forgot something, I guess I just have to deal with that now. Really hope you guys liked the video, and if you did, maybe subscribe and stick around. Have a great day, stay safe out there, and I will see y'all in the next video.